If there's one monster type in the Monster Hunter series that feels a little bit neglected in my personal opinion, it has to be none other than the Piscine Wyverns.
I can't stand this guy. Just this monster sucks. The Beotodus creatures in general just like,
There is a problem with the category when even the perception of the name itself, Piscine Wyvern, makes people have the reaction that it does. Nobody hears that term and gets excited.
Nearly 2 decades of development, and the best we have to show for it is Beotodus. Yikes.
I think it's fair to say that Piscine Wyverns are more or less the punching bags of the Monster Hunter fan base. Having the same skeleton as a flying wyvern but grounded with fins that let them swim in their environment, they were introduced back in the first generation with Plesioth and Cephadrome, and have universally been bashed on by old and new fans alike. I definitely believe that the hate for this group is quite overblown. Now, I know I haven't been too nice to them myself, ranking both Beotodus and Levisioth in the bottom 5 of my world ranking. There are definitely some boring or below average ones, but what I'm more so addressing is the inherent hatred that people have for Piscine Wyverns. There's this strong sentiment that every member of this classification is destined to be horrible. I don't find this to be true at all. While Piscines might not have the liberties and flexibility of a class like Leviathans, there's a lot of untapped potential that Capcom simply hasn't been experimenting with. After all, the biggest streaks of creativity often come from limitations. Fish are one of the most diverse animal groups on the entire planet. Whale sharks, moray eels, sturgeons, and stingrays are all part of the same circle. Just think about that for a second. You could have a marlin piscine that uses its spear-like snout as a weapon, a Dunkleostis piscine that fights in a brutish and rabid way like a Doshiguma, a barracuda wyvern that uses its terrifying speed to ambush its prey. There's so much you can do here, and plenty of well-done fan art does exist to prove how well this can be executed with many species, like lionfish or sawfish. But if you want to see Capcom's ability to do this odd classification of monsters right, you look to Beotodus. Out of the games I've played, Beotodus easily holds up as the greatest Piscine Wyvern there is, and that seems to be a sentiment that most people share. Yet despite saying all of this, Beotodus got left in the bottom 10 of the community poll, a spot that puts him below every other Piscine Wyvern, and is often considered one of the weakest additions to Iceborne's roster. The phrase I always seen thrown around is, "He's the best Piscine Wyvern," but that's not saying much. And that's where I think people are wrong. Because this frozen fillet is unironically fantastic. With an awesome design, a surprising amount of mechanical depth, an intriguing ecology, a lot of additions to the world building, this tundra tuna has way more complexity than meets the eye. It may seem silly to start off this new series of mine with a low-level snow shark instead of a beloved flagship or iconic elder dragon, especially a certain one that I'm sure many thought I would prioritize instead, but respect needs to be given to these early game monsters. So let's slide right into it. I'm Bry Bastion Bobsled, and this is my creature critique of the frozen fish wyvern Beotodus. As mentioned in the intro segment, there's a lot of untouched potential with designing a Piscine Wyvern that the developers simply haven't experimented with. For example, you have Beotodus, who's a coelacanth with legs, but nothing else is done here. A coelacanth is a good baseline to start with, but it doesn't have enough unique qualities to stand out. And they didn't integrate any other fish species to make the design interesting. Levisioth suffers from the same problem. They use that template of an ancient fish, but there's not enough unique qualities to make them visually distinct compared to Beotodus. The older games definitely did a better job with that, but World's Incarnation didn't even try. This works in the case of Rathalos because he is the exception, the baseline to contrast with more exotic flying wyverns like Kezu or Diablos. The design of Beotodus was intended to be a baseline for all the other Piscines, but when you have him, Levisioth, Arugunozu, and Gorugunozu from Frontier, who all share the exact same sculpt and inspiration, it completely loses its luster. The only Piscines I could point to as taking these creative liberties were Plesioth and Cephadrome. I know these two get a lot of hate, but talking pure aesthetics, they do a great job distinguishing themselves from any other creature. Cephadrome being a land shark inspired by hammerheads, crimson, having the face of a Diplocalus with once vibrant colors that became dull brown due to his desert niche, while Plesioff is a massive lionfish-inspired Piscine that took the same ancient fish template, but added the spines and bright colors of lionfish to make it interesting. That is how you start making your Piscine more visually compelling, and Beotodus takes this even further, having inspiration from a variety of concepts and creatures that go beyond just landfish. Just by looking at the sculpt of this creature, you can see how distinct he is, and all of those aspects are explained in ways that align with something forced to survive in the deep snowbanks of Hoarfrost Reach. Their scales are the most sleek, given they are swimming through granular solids like deep snow, rather than a liquid like water or lava. They have small ridges or fins on their legs to push through snow, a thick tail to propel forward, and most prominently, that massive curved horn on their head to cut through snow. It was definitely inspired by icebreaker ships, the Boasaid ships being used to break through ice under their weight. And the same function applies to Beotodus' horn. That horn does have a limit, as Beotodus doesn't have the size or speed to break through ice, which is why you don't see it swimming out in the open Arctic waters. They're sported with a single dorsal ray fin perpendicular to 2 pectoral fins on their sides, along with 4 more dorsal fins, 2 on its posterior and 2 on its sides, as well as a small lobe fin on their tail. They also have 2 small cranial fins on each side of their head, likely used for hearing, and a single elongated claw on each pectoral fin. Each fin serves the purpose of propelling this fish through the snow. And despite people calling Beo a snow shark, he doesn't have the features of a shark. You see, the top dorsal fin isn't one you'd see on a shark. It might look like that at first glance, but shark fins are way more rigid and triangular due to being cartilage. Meanwhile, this fin is much more curved and flexible, which is something you only see in fish fins. Not just that, but this fin looks identical to the fins found in shark catfishes, which are not a shark in the slightest, they just resemble them. The Perun shark in particular looks like a perfect match to the Beo fin. The color scheme absolutely makes this monster. While explainable because of the need to blend into their environments, the color schemes on a lot of Piscines are pretty bland and uninteresting. Plesioff was the only one given colors that actually pop due to it not being covered in environmental armor. Because Beotodus is in the snow, he doesn't have to fall under those restrictions, and is given this sleek navy blue body that does a great job contrasting with the white snow on him. What makes me love it is that beautiful gold and red underside that's clearly inspired by a brook trout. It contrasts so nicely with the rest of its body, and the vibrancy works because prey will only see the navy blue camouflaged under the snow. It reminds me a lot of Nergigante in that sense. If Nergi was just black and gray all over, I would not nearly like his look as much, but the pleasant orange and purple on his underside contrasts with the sharp black on top in a visually pleasing way. There's other details to their design too, like his canine teeth that seem to be based on several river fish, like muskellunge, pyra, and alligator gar, which makes sense given they hunt large herbivores like popo. They also have nostrils on the top of their head behind their rigid horn, something entirely unique to it, and allows them to breathe while most of their body is submerged in snow. All of these details make for a much more complex creature design than usually seen, not only standing out compared to any monster in these games, but also showing how much visual flair you can give to a classification like this.
Son of a bitch! Looks like ice cold sushi for breakfast.
Now that we've gotten a good look at all these Alaskan salmon, let's take a dive into what it's like to hunt this thing. Not only does Beotodus have a design that I think far outdoes every other Piscine, but his fight is also an aspect that definitely deserves more credit. One of the first things I see people complain about with say Levisioff and Plesioff is their ability to go out of bounds and attack you in places where you can't attack it. With Plesioff, mainly the first interpretation of him, he could dive into the water at any time during the battle, where he was free to fire H2O beams safely from a distance. The same applies for World's Levisioff, where he could pop into the pools of his nest at any time, jumping from lava pool to lava pool and spitting out easy to dodge magma from afar. This is where Beotodus stands out, because he swims in the deep snow that you can waddle through, and although there's some areas that will make you walk slowly, there is never a spot Beotodus will swim to that you can't access. Another source of complaint in Piscines is that they usually tend to slide away from you and blast their elemental breath attacks from a distance. Plesioff slides away to fire his pressure washer, Levisioff slides away to blast his exploding magma balls, even Rise Geratidus, a fight I consider to be an improvement improvement over the world version, suffers even more from sliding away to fire mud balls. Meanwhile, Beotodus doesn't have a traditional elemental beam like the others. His elemental damage simply comes from smacking snow towards you at mid-range. Everything else he does is entirely physical. Because of this, the only times he swims away from you are when he's prepping to do a dive attack from underground. While other Piscines maintain distance to spew attacks from long range, Beotodus closes the distance to attack you with close range attacks. Something that really benefits Beo is the moveset variety, which is way more varied than the other two in World and thus makes him way more dynamic. Let's go over each move he has. There's the typical attacks found on every other one, such as the flop forward where he gets back up on his feet, the iconic hip check of cosmic proportions, the Rathalos tail sweep and little bite, the ability to roll around and cover itself in its environmental armor like Jura Tater Tot, and the ability to dive below the surface and pop up as a surprise attack. What's unique about Beotodus is that his dive attack can actually be changed up. With Beotodus, the moment he dives underwater, you know he's gonna do the same jump attack over and over and over and over. However, Beotodus can dive under the snow just to pop up behind you and attack you off screen. He can also lean into a backstroke to swim away from you, but will often follow this up with one of 3 diving attacks. One is the typical dive attack we're familiar with. The second one is where he'll roar, swim up to where you're standing, dive downwards, and then breach up like a humpback whale. The third and final one is when he leans back to roar, does a dolphin dive backwards into the snow, then lunges forward with a ludicrous amount of speed. Each dive has a very distinct tail that clearly communicates which one you're dealing with, and you can even use sound cues to know it's coming. Every time Beo preps a dive attack, he'll let out this iconic clicking sound. So if he dives behind you for a sneak attack, you can listen out for that roar to know the dive is coming. Another mechanic that was better incorporated into Beo was Screamer Pods, which are super underutilized with the obvious exceptions of Diablos and Balahara. Sonic Bombs, as they were called in older games, did serve a purpose in forcing certain fish like Plesioth away from out-of-bounds areas, and were supposed to be used against some like Levisioth, but ended up feeling non-existent in World. Because Beo has 3 different diving attacks, it creates a lot more opportunities to force him out of the snow, whereas it felt lucky to get 1 or 2 times with that spicy tuna roll. Then onto the other new attacks. As mentioned, Beotodus lacks any long-ranged abilities that most Piscines have, so they gave him a variety of physical attacks to bolster up his moveset. He can use that massive horn as a weapon, slamming it down to deal ice damage from the snow being kicked up. There's also this move where he starts spinning on his side like a Beyblade, reminding me a lot of Radobon's Beyblade spins. A lot of these attacks are focused on kicking up snow to inflict you with Ice Blight, as is the case when he sweeps his tail at you, where the goal isn't to hit you with the tail, but rather cover you in a wave of snow hurled from the tail sweep. The developers noted that elemental blights and damage were really lacking in base World's roster. The only ice monster was Legiana after all, so one of the main goals of Beotodus was to reteach players about elemental damage, getting them prepared to handle blights when they get to even more element heavy monsters like Velkhana or Namiel. I think this monster works great as a teacher for that, especially when part breaking can be used to wear down his elemental abilities. A lot of people don't know this, but breaking apart on Beotodus benefits you in 2 ways. One, it prevents him from covering it in snow and no longer needing to break through the armor, and 2, it reduces the amount of snow kicked up by attacks involving that body part. So if you break the horn, he can't cover it in snow and that head slam doesn't kick up a crazy amount of snow like it did before. This applies for other body parts like the legs and tail. A mechanic that people tend to ignore or not realize exists is the legs being the main weak point you should prioritize. If you don't believe me, just look at the hit zones. The cutting damage is 45 to the head, but 70 to the legs. That's a difference of 25, which is insane given most people will just attack the head and nothing else. There's this fantastic rhythm that only Beotodus is able to capture in World's roster. He'll have his bottom half under the snow, with his top half being the only part you can attack. However, this top part is armored, so unlike most monsters, the head and tail are not the weakest point. Basically, the goal is to deal enough damage to knock the fish out of the snow and leave his legs exposed for the hunter. Not only does this make the legs actually matter for this guy, but it actually creates a goal to knock the snow armor off to force him out of his turf. Then dish out damage on his exposed legs until he burrows back into the snow, and the cycle repeats. But this cycle gets shorter every time, because you'll be breaking body parts and reducing the amount of snow you'll have to break each time. It's especially funny that people are unaware of this because the game directly communicates this information to you. During Iceborne's campaign, when you fight Beotodus, the handler literally tells you that
It says its legs are its weak point. If you can get it out of the snow so you can attack it, if you can break its leg fins, you might be able to avoid ice blight. Beotodus' weak point is its legs. Now's the time to attack them.
people just never listen to this because, well, it's the handler. Speaking of which, the last point I want to make is how effectively this cold cod works as a teaching tool in Iceborne. Beotodus is the first boss you encounter in Iceborne's campaign, being thrown on us as an ambush just after exploring the opening sections of Hoarfrost Reach. He was designed with the intent of being a warm-up boss, one for people to get back into Monster Hunter after taking a break from the base game before Iceborne, which makes sense. He serves to teach players about elemental damage as mentioned before, both in dealing with the ice blight he inflicts, as well as using elemental damage to counter him. Just like how Slinger Torch heats up Lava Sloth's armor as a weak point, Slinger Torch can also be used to melt away the snow on his body, as is the case with fire weapons. The developers felt that they should have a new monster to introduce players to this new land, being the Hinterlands, and thus designed him to make you feel out of your element, with you being slower in the snow but still more mobile than the swamps of Wildspire. Something that Beo also efficiently teaches is how to use the Clutch Claw. Every time you knock off all his snow armor, you get a drool flinch that encourages Clutch Claw use. Every time you break a body part, you get a drool flinch. Every time you bang him into a wall, you knock off all the snow armor. The game is making this first boss especially easy to Clutch Claw to encourage the new mechanics of this expansion. Granted, the Clutch Claw turned out to be a tiresome mechanic that was hated by a bulk of the fanbase, but that wasn't Beo's fault. He does a great job teaching the mechanics he's supposed to. It was just the mechanic itself that people didn't like. To make it clear, this fight isn't up to the insane quality of stuff like Glavenus or Zinogre, but the battle definitely deserves more credit than it's been given. There is plenty of room for improvement, but I definitely think Beo's return would allow them to really push his moveset. They could add some more physical attacks with his horn or tail, and despite praising him for teaching the Clutch Claw, it's also to his detriment since that makes him drool way too much during the fight and way too easy to counter. One complaint I have is this one disengage Beotodus can do, where he'll swim away only to do a semicircle and come back without doing any attack. This is where I think you could make him function like Diablos. Make him burrow under the snow, you see his horn circling you like the cutscene, then he pops out with this huge sweeping charge akin to Black Diablos. Stuff like that could really take this fight to the next level. Even so, this fight is so much of an upgrade compared to World's other Piscine Wyverns. He has engaging moves you need to learn how to properly avoid, interesting mechanics that force you to think smartly about how you approach the boss, and a dynamic moveset that makes the most out of the Piscine skeleton, while still avoiding a lot of the trappings that previous fish have fell in. If you fly through Iceborne's expansion, you may assume Beotodus is just a snow-covered Geratidus with the exact same mechanics, but when you take a deeper look at it, Beotodus truly is a worthwhile hunt. The lore in Ecology runs surprisingly deep with Beotodus, adding both to him as an animal and to the world building of Hoarfrost Reach. Like other Piscenes, Beotodus specializes in swimming through a certain environment, in this case being snow and having evolutionary traits to accommodate that, such as the long curved horn and sleek scales I talked about in the design segment. Because of the advantage they gain against prey and predators when traversing in deep white powder, Beotodus prioritizes a lifestyle in the lower regions of Hoarfrost Reach, where the snow is deep and the popo is plentiful. The jaws allowed them to feed on large prey, twisting their head and body to tear off chunks of meat that they swallow whole. Beo also functions as an ambush predator akin to crocodiles, hidden beneath the snow with only the tip of its horn poking out, just enough for the nostrils on that horn to breathe air until lunging out at unaware prey. What helps is that they possess a sonar-like sensory organ that detects vibrations, also known as echolocation, allowing it to easily notice prey without blowing its cover. As is the case with brook trouts, I assume that the bright colors determine how successful their mating is during spawning season, with said colors being accentuated by their diet of popo and teca or other herbivores. Because of their limited space in the snowbanks, they are incredibly territorial and often pick fights with other beasts like Bombero. Despite being the lowest part of this biome's large monster totem pole, he still far outclasses the low-tier monsters in other locales like Puke Puke or Palumu. Usually you can look to the carved materials or parts of monsters for some extra lore or biology tidbits, but there's not a lot to say about Beotodus parts. The only one worth mentioning is the cryosac, which is a monster organ found not just on this guy, but also a variety of other cold climate-based monsters, such as Gosharog, Barioth, or Aurora Somnicanth. It serves as a potent freezing agent, increasing the temperature and point at which water freezes, and thus allowing for ice to form in a much more rapid manner. In the case of creatures like Gosharog, that freezing agent is applied in their throats, allowing ice to form and creating a long-range breath attack. However, Beotodus' freezing agent serves a different purpose since he doesn't have a breath attack. It instead acts as a coat of liquid that covers their entire body, which allows snow to stick and freeze onto them as they move around. Snow does stick to your body as it does with a fish's body, but the cryosac simply amplifies this, allowing enough packed snow on its body to fully withstand blows dealt by foes. I always prefer seeing the ecology of lower level monsters, where they put in the effort to explain their abilities and role in the ecosystem. Furthermore, I always prefer when monsters are more grounded and gain their abilities, especially elemental ones, through their environment, rather than being able to breathe lightning because of some sac in its throat. A prime example of this is Barioth, who gains his water element through the mud he rolls around in, making him more realistic than a monster like Kirin. Beotodus also achieves this, as he's not directly an ice monster, but a snow monster, covering himself in snow for armor and smacking you with snow to inflict ice blight. The explanation for why they hurl snow at prey is still up for debate, but it makes the most sense that Beo is simply blinding his prey and covering them in snow to lower their body temperature, thus slowing them down. Something I haven't found a good time to mention yet is the absolutely fantastic sound design. A lot of Monster Hunter roars have become iconic to listen to, but the same can't be said for Piscines, as all of them have incredibly generic roars and noises. On the other hand, Beotodus has these distinct clicks and growls like a chainsaw that stand out compared to any other monster. And it's not just a, oh, it kinda resembles a chainsaw, but really it's a roar. No, they seriously use the sounds of chainsaws, motorcycles, and lawnmowers to get these roars and growls. When it comes to the evolution of Piscine wyverns, they aren't related to traditional fish like Gaojiao, but are instead wyverns that evolved fish-like traits to accommodate swimming in their environment, and monsters like Levisioth and Beotodus branching out due to different terrains like lava or snow. Probably the most accurate ecology they have to real-life fish is their early life and conception. Beotodus are known to be ovoviviparous. This means that the young Beotodus does not receive nutrients from the mother, instead relying on the eggs for nutrition. When the eggs can no longer sustain the Beotodus' unborn young, the young cannibalize each other inside the womb. This development process leads to only 2 or 3 individuals being born into the outside world, which is highly unusual for wyverns, but it serves as an effective strategy to ensure only the most adept survivalists are given the opportunity to thrive. There's a lot to break down about tundra tuna's ecology, and they efficiently explain everything about them, their ice elements, their ability to swim in snow, and what role they serve in such a vast and dynamic ecosystem. But all that ecology doesn't include my favorite aspect of their lore, their rivalry with the Boa Boa. The Boa Boa are tribal Linians that wear masks imitating the look of a popo, and have made their settlement deep in the hot springs of the hinterlands. If you go into their hideouts, you'll find a very familiar skull of none other than Beotodus. It very much gives me Subnautica vibes in terms of how large this creature and its ancestors grew to be. You'll also find a giant slab of meat cooked over a huge barbecue spit, which I thought was a giant steak of popo, but getting a closer look reveals it not to be a steak, but our tundra tuna cooked well done. You can tell just by looking at the body shape and the fins on the dorsal side. The natives treat this creature as a sort of god, and when young Boa Boa reach a certain age, they conduct a rite of passage passage to prove themselves worthy. This involves a group of young Boa Boa joining together to hunt a Beotodus in a glorious battle. What's even better is that you yourself can participate in these hunts. If you go to the Boa Boa hideout and befriend these furry folk, they'll invite you to an optional quest, By Our Powers Combined, where you and a party of Boa Boa will hunt a tempered Beotodus. And it's not a basic, oh, hunt a Beotodus while one Boa Boa joins you. No. You and this entire squad of Boa Boa scare a Popo, lure it into a certain location where it serves as bait, then you get this little cinematic of our snowfish coming out of nowhere to kill this Popo, confirming it as an ambush predator and showing that off in gameplay. Then, the Boa Boa jump him with harpoons and you hunt the Beotodus with this party. After killing him, the Boa Boa will join as tail riders and will help you out with any hunts in the locale, not just with Beotodus. All of this really adds to the world building of Hoarfrost Reach, expanding on the natives and their civilization, as well as giving Beotodus more of a role than meets the eye. Most Piscine Wyverns are given some interesting lore, but that connection that Beotodus has with the Boa Boa really makes him stand out in not just his classification, but compared to any other large monster. Now that we've successfully collected our frozen tuna from our local Kroger, let's look into what gear you can make out of him. Starting with the armor set, I love the aesthetic. It's sleek, it's simple, it's very effective, and communicates the main aspects of the monster in a satisfying way. The armor prioritizes triangular shapes and sharp edges, with scaled plates atop each other and fins on the edges of said plates. The use of white stripes with the navy blue looks really clean, and makes full use of that color scheme I love so much about Beotodus. The helmet is especially awesome. The monster with the giant curved horn would obviously give you a helmet with this badass single horn, along with slits for eyes that look super intimidating altogether. The female and male armor sets are kept relatively the same, which is nice to see, except for... Jesus, Jelly Jamboree. Okay, what is with Monster Hunter's obsession with making female helmets show the face? Male armors get so many cool helmets to choose from, and then the female version just gets this hole cut into it for their face to poke out. That's not a problem exclusive to Beotodus, it's just something that's really annoying about this series. Aside from that problem, the Beotodus set looks fantastic, and I especially like the red fins on the beta set, and that red color is what you can change in the color settings if you don't like it. Looking at the skills, Beotodus has one of the best armor sets to get through the Master Rank expansion, especially for how early you have access to it. For example, the armor for Gerardus undeniably looks fantastic, but good luck using it when the skills are muck resistance and walking through waist-deep water faster. They tried to improve this in Master Rank with latent power and focus, but still didn't match the utility with the quality of its visuals. On the other hand, the Beo armor may have a slot for snow mobility and ice attack, but also has essential skills like health boost, earplugs, and stamina surge. These skills, especially health boost, are useful for all weapon builds, and they still have aspects like ice attack that you can play around with using elemental weapons. I talked to many people who used Beotodus armor for the entire Iceborne campaign, and I totally understand why. It's a great set that has awesome visuals matched with equally awesome skills. A gag weapon that existed in Monster Hunter long before World but became attributed to Beotodus and Iceborne was the Frozen Spear Tuna. This was a great sword made of a now endemic life known as the Spear Tuna, one that got frozen and deals ice damage. You crafted this through getting tickets from the special event quest Trophy Fishing, where you fought two Beotodus back to back. It's a surprisingly efficient elemental weapon, making it a valid choice when facing a Latrion to meet the DPS check. I do really like this joke weapon being attributed to Beotodus, and I totally wouldn't mind if Frozen Spear Tuna became a main ice weapon made of Beotodus parts if he were to return. The Palico armor though is absolute perfection. I know that a majority of Palico armors are peak, but this is an easy top 5 placement. You take a creature that slides and swims in snow, and turn that into a snowboarding outfit with a titular snowboard as the weapon. How could you not expect me to love it with every fiber of my being? The orange and navy pattern is great, and the attention to detail is on point. From the eyes being visible behind the orange goggles, the commission logo on the beanie, you can even see his draws out if you look behind him. Beotodus returning is worth it just to see this Palico armor again. Then we get to his actual weapons and... oh boy, here we go. The ice damage is fine, but the designs are... oh god, oh no. Oh lord, what did they do to you, my boy? Let's go over each one. The greatsword is hideous, but it's like the least bad. All they needed to do was extend that bottom part to the whole greatsword. It wouldn't be amazing, but certainly better than this ugly bone chicken wing. Then, the charge blade. I guess the star aesthetic isn't the worst thing ever, but it clashes so terribly with the bone that I want to put out a campfire with my head. Onto the light bow gun. Ugh, this is disgusting. It looks like a Fortnite gun cover. You're a criminal for this, Capcom. Then the dual blades. That dude needed 13 reasons why? Bitch, I only need one reason why. This godforsaken design. The insect glaive. Oh my god, what did he do to you? This really comes down to the bits on sticks problem with the Monster Hunter world, where weapons were generic bone and ore, and given little monster pieces on them to make it more realistic, I guess. I know they intended for every design to start out as the bits on sticks, then the final weapon would be a cool unique design, but what we got was pretty damn disappointing. I could easily see them making good weapon designs out of this guy. I saw a hammer fan art in particular that was literally perfect. If all of the designs looked like this, you would hear me singing praises out the wazoo. The armor reminds me a lot of the Blade Master aesthetic found on Shogun Scimitar's armor, and that same aesthetic applied to Shogun's weapons could very much be applied to Beotodus' weapons. You could have the greatsword just be the giant Beotodus horn, or dual blades be the fins of Beo with some reddish yellow flare on the edges. While the Beotodus weapons may be an absolute trash heap, I don't blame Beotodus in the slightest because this is an overall game issue, not an issue exclusive to him. This is where the return of this monster could really shine, giving him the chance to create weapons that are on par with the great quality found in his armor sets. But for now, these weapons just kinda go splat. I think it's safe to say that I will defend Beotodus till the day I die, and find him to be both overlooked and underrated at the same time. He's got indisputably the best design of any Piscine, a really solid fight that avoids the common issues other Piscines tend to have, some interesting ecology that connects him with the Boa Boa, and some really damn good armor, even if the weapons aren't up to par. So why was he ranked in the bottom 10 of that poll, far behind Jura Tater Tot and Lava Sloth? Well, it's less that he's despised or disliked, and more so forgotten over time. He's a Hoarfrost exclusive that doesn't hang around in the areas with late game monsters, so people don't often see him on the map. He's also one of only 2 monsters to not appear in the Guiding Lands, the other being Gyarados. I get why, because there's no snowy sections there for him to swim in, but with how small the Tundra region is in comparison to every other region in the Guiding Lands, they could have so easily just taken the snowbank that Beotodus uses as a nest in Hoarfrost, and just copy-pasted that into the Tundra section of the Grinding Lands. I doubt that Capcom is gonna see monsters like Great Roggy in the bottom chunk of the community poll and decide never to bring them back, but I am worried that this poll might play a part in preventing Beotodus from returning in the future. We did get to see him in Monster Hunter now, but they weirdly seem to keep prioritizing Gyarados of all monsters. I hope that Capcom decides to finally branch out with more creative Piscines, because they definitely deserve a second chance from people, starting with Beotodus. Not just because Beotodus is a great Piscine Wyvern, but also because he is simply a great monster. But for the love of God, don't let him get bottom 10 of the next community poll. This is Bry Bastion Benedicts, and lead thy life as thou seest fit.